Your Excellency, the former head of state of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, Dr. Benedict Orama, Chairman and President of the African Export-Import Bank, Mr. Kutwane, Chief Executive Officer for the Export Credit Insurance Corporation of South Africa, Mr. Jean-Louis Ekra, former President of the African Export-Import Bank, Ms. Lerato Mataboge, Deputy Director General in the Department of Trade and Industry of the Republic of South Africa, Captains of Industry, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. May I begin by joining the Chief Operating Officer for ECIC, Mr. Mandisi Nkulu, in welcoming, as well as thanking you all for gracing this occasion with your presence. It gives me great joy to be standing here on this historic day for the launch of the South Africa Trade and Investment Promotion Program, SATIP. It is also very pleasing to be standing in this marvelous venue. The Sandton Convention Center opened in 2000, and it epitomizes what Africa can achieve when it unleashes imagination to create world-class infrastructure that blends well with the splendor of its natural environment. Permit me also to add that I'm elated to be in South Africa amongst the people who adopted the Greek mythical behavior of Sisyphus, who kept rolling the stone up the mountain even when the stone kept coming down. This behavior showed determination despite the great diversity of going up the hill. It is not by chance that South Africa continues to be the leading industrialized as well as most advanced nation in Africa. It has earned its success. We cannot also forget that it was South Africa that gave the world the first human-to-human heart transplant that was performed by Dr. Christian Barnard at Groote Schuur Hospital in December 1967. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today is also a special occasion because after 25 years of Afreximbank's existence, it looks like it's finally completing its journey from Cairo to Cape this time. This auspicious gathering brings together business leaders from various sectors, including manufacturing, retail trade, and financial services, to mention a few. These leaders are part of an ever-growing industrial sector with a combined contribution of 67% to the GDP of South Africa. We also know that in some of these cases, up to 25% of their profits come from the rest of Africa, not necessarily from South Africa. It is also interesting to know that Africa's combined share of global value chains remains at around 3.2%. South Africa's share of that is 0.6%, and that's almost 20%, by far the largest for a single African country. It's also interesting to note that South Africa generates over 12% of its GDP from franchising, a figure that exceeds the success of Australia and even the United States of America. There are names like Pick and Pay, QuickFit, OBC, Postnet, Nando, some of whom are represented in this audience today. It is no wonder that South Africa has the largest share of intra-African trade of around 25% of total intra-regional trade, with the highest contribution in terms of imports as well as exports. In addition, South Africa also has the highest number of African companies with revenues of more than $500 million per annum. Based on this solid foundation, ECIC, whose mandate is to facilitate and encourage South African export trade and participation in economic development projects abroad, and Afreximbank, whose mandate is to promote intra and extra-African trade, came together and designed SATIP, which is being launched today in an initial amount of $1 billion. Note that this effort will support also the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and also the heightened political enthusiasm for regional integration across the continent. Allow me to briefly expound on some of the rationale and interventions available under SATIP. We have observed that African exporters sometimes are unable to compete with exporters and contractors from other countries, and other continents, rather. And that's because of financing. Most times, exporters from other continents are usually backed by their officially supported credit agencies with attractive credit packages, making it extremely difficult for African businesses to compete because of this financing handicap. If measures such as what we're doing today, which in a sense, a call to arms, are not in place, that could provide competitive export credit support for exporters, their competitiveness will continue to be undermined. It is on this basis that we, Afreximbank and ECIC, are providing a suite of co-branded instruments, unfunded and funded products that will provide liquidity as well as risk mitigation to support trade and investment between South Africa and the rest of Africa. Allow me to talk about a few of the products that we have under SATIP. SATIP will provide for export credit guarantee to help leverage financing to support exports of capital goods and services by South African businesses to other African countries. SATIP will provide for country risk guarantees to address political risk concerns of South African businesses trading or looking to invest in other African countries. It will also provide investment guarantees that protect the rights of South African companies, investors rather, operating in other African countries. Risks such as providing protection against expropriation or nationalization, in the firms in which the investment has been made, or the government actions that may hinder investors from normal operations or even repatriation of profits, and others. It will support South African companies bidding for large contracts in Afreximbank member countries, which are 50 right now, by providing bid bonds, advance payment guarantees, performance bonds, as well as guarantees that cover African government commitments to project promoters. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, SATIP is designed to support large corporates as well as SMEs, and all sectors across the value chains. In addition to the instruments that I just mentioned above, we can also avail global facilities to large South African corporates and conglomerates that are operating in multiple African countries for utilization, both by the holding company and their subsidiaries, to take care of their diverse financing needs as omnibus lines. We have instituted a program we call Intra-African Trade Champions, Intra-Champs. We provide these global facilities to them. We also provide twinning support and facilitate the awards of contracts to those intra-African trade champions by African governments. For instance, in 2017, we supported an Egyptian company that is involved in the electricity value chain to win contracts with various countries across Africa, in Togo, Angola, and Guinea, in an amount of nearly $1 billion. We will also support the emergence and expansion of export trading companies. These are companies that facilitate the connection between producers and buyers, and international buyers. Indeed, we actually see, and we have identified, at least in Afreximbank, that South Africa is a key hub for promoting ETCs as well as intra-African trade champions, obviously. We have other support on that startup as well. We will support the acquisition by South African entities of eligible franchises in trade and trade-related activities and services, as well as franchises that support the growth of South African SMEs. We will support local South African companies and SMEs providing services in extractive and related industries to increase South African value-added content in these industries. We will support the financing of importation of equipment needed by South African export manufacturers to retool their processing facilities. We will also finance projects undertaken by South African businesses in other African countries through our project finance and equipment finance facilities. This will support not just manufacturing, but also trade-related infrastructure. We will provide, together with ECIC, will provide construction finance guarantees that support the construction industry in view of the significant contracts that South African construction companies execute in other African countries. In this arrangement, ECIC will provide construction guarantees against which Afreximbank, and as a matter of fact, other financial institutions can provide liquidity. Finally, in addition to deal origination and co-financing transactions with ECIC, we will also support efforts at improving skills of our South African exporters in export marketing to the rest of Africa through our capacity building initiatives that we have started in Egypt and that we want to take around our intra-African trade hubs, of which South Africa is one. ECIC and ourselves will also jointly handle policy advocacy initiatives. Although I'm coming to a close, ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to use this platform to introduce a related and very important continental initiative. The Intra-African Trade Fair. This is the first of its kind ever, which Afreximbank, in collaboration with the African Union, are convening and with the Arab Republic of Egypt as hosts, that will take place in Cairo at the International Exhibition Center between the 11th and 17th of December of this year. This event is expected to bring together more than 1,000 exhibitors from across Africa and beyond, and to attract more than 70,000 visitors, buyers and sellers, generating in excess of 25 billion in trade deals. The Intra-African Trade Fair, or the IATF, as we dub it, is one of the interventions that is provided for under the Afreximbank's Intra-African Trade Strategy, which seeks to close the gap on trade and market information, as well as create a sustainable platform for connecting buyers and sellers across Africa. Although Cairo will be the first one, we intend to hold this event every 2 years. The analysis by Afreximbank shows that one of the main reasons why intra-African trade is low is because of lack of access to trade, as well as investment and market information. The trade fair also supports the implementation of the CFTA, obviously, which creates a single market for goods and services with free movement of business persons and investments. As you will have noted, today's agenda includes an engagement session with the business community, which is scheduled to hold later this afternoon. We intend to discuss details of our proposals and obtain your views on how best we can support South African businesses as they look to expand to other African countries. In the same vein, we also plan to share more practical information on the trade fair later in the program. As I close, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I believe the choices we make and the paths we choose together will make a difference to intra-African trade, and actually to Africa. And permit me to close with two quotations. A quote by Captain of Industry, US Captain of Henry Ford, who says, "Coming together as we're doing now is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success." May I also quote the former president of Nigeria, President Olusegun Obasanjo, who said, just before he steps up, "Unless intra-African trade increases by at least or to at least 50% of total trade, Africa will not be fully liberated."